So the first message we got says, "Hi, I follow you guys on Instagram and I'm doing a Bachelor's of Architecture. I'm in my first year. I actually wanted to ask you about how you deal with failure, as it is something that I've been struggling with since I started my school. I don't know if you will ever see this message, but I'm so afraid of architecture studies and university. I enrolled in September and I'm like at my third week of it, but I'm already afraid of failing and not being worthy. They asked, without any lessons, us to redraw the facade of our main university building, and I'm like, how the hell am I supposed to do it without any generic guideline?"
I think his response is both comical and totally reasonable, and one I think we can both identify with. So a lot of ways to talk about this. Maybe, I don't know, when you start architecture school, and this person's a first year, right? But I think some of these concerns with failure exists all throughout years 1 through 5. But when you started architecture school, did you have the same experience of being asked to perform and to achieve things and not feeling like you were given enough guidance on how to do it?
Yeah. Yeah, of course I did. And I mean...
You say of course, but it sounds like it wouldn't make sense, right? If you go to school to learn about something, you would think that the school and the teachers would teach you that thing and then test you on that thing.
Well,
right?
there was a couple of things, right? Like when you start architecture school, let's assume you start right after high school. The way you learn things in high school, you learn things that you don't know. But you know how you're going to learn them because you learned that from like elementary school, right? You've been going through that for many years and you kind of know the system of, you know, what it's going to be like to learn those things, right? So you leave high school and you start in a new school that's very focused on one thing, a thing that you absolutely know nothing about, most likely, unless your parents are architects and, you know, you've been exposed to that. So it's pretty scary. It's like day one of elementary school. Like, you don't know how to write. You don't know how to read, let's say. Like, I mean, you know, maybe. So it's a bit disarming. You enter a very uncomfortable zone, right? I went to art school in between the two, so I was already kind of exposed to the idea of failure and learning something that you don't know with mediums and ways of expression that you don't know. You know, so it's a bit disarming. It's funny because I would totally see how a teacher would ask that exercise to a starting student.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's like, okay, how well do you know how to write? Let me show you, I'm asking you to write this sentence so I can see how each of you are able to write and kind of gauge the level of the students, maybe their experience, their willingness of trying something they don't know and their participation in it and all of that stuff. So from a teacher standpoint, it makes complete sense, right?
Oh, you're saying as a way to kind of test
as a
the
way to
students
just
and
kind of
see.
like see what's the baseline here. Where are you all at? Like, you know, you all come from like different backgrounds, different areas. Like, let's just kind of for me to gauge what level you're at.
That's
maybe,
interesting.
right?
I didn't think of it that way. Yeah.
But for a student, it's like you've been taught from elementary school up until high school, you know, a very like regimented way of doing things that makes sense. You know, you learn from zero and you slowly add increments to it.
Yeah.
People don't ask you to write your name before you learn how to write.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of different things you brought up that are good. The first is I totally agree that, I mean, it's been some time since we were both in elementary school and high school, but I think that if I look at my, I'd say, high school experience and I look at the high school experience of people older than me, you can see that the trajectory of how education has evolved. And so in high school, what that means is all the grades over the last, 30 years, back when I was in school, have inflated dramatically. A lot of the school teachings I feel are much more structured, and it's a system, as you kind of described. It's a structure, and you understand by the time you get to senior year, let's say, you've been through 4, 5, 6, how many years of that structure, and you understand the game. There's a certain game to it, and you become comfortable in that game. And you understand that the way the education system works is, again, you are taught the material, more or less, and then you're quizzed on that material. Of course, sometimes you get to a test and you're like, what the heck, we were never taught this, and that happens. But generally, that's not the case, right? Generally, it's you learn. I teach you 2 + 2 is 4. And then on the test, I ask you, what is 2 + 2? What is 2 + 3? And then you give an answer. And it's that is the direction of behavior.
And therefore, if you fail after you learn,
then you've messed up.
Then that's not good.
Yeah, because
right?
you were given the content. You were told this is the thing that you have to study. So there is the way of learning is kind of imbued into people because of that. And also the expectation that you are going to get a very high grade is part of it too. Like in public high school, unless things have changed dramatically, you're going to get a B or an A in every class, unless if you're somewhat intelligent, from my perspective, again, back when I was in school. If you're getting C's and D's, then you're really doing something. If you fail class, then you're doing something atrocious. That means you're not showing up or something. So there's this assumption that we're all going to get A's all the time. And then you have to do, what do you call it? Those special classes where they're worth college credit. Oh, what are they called? Honors. I'm blanking. It's a course you take in high school that's basically the equivalent to some kind of college credits, right? Okay. And so you take that, and then you can boost your GPA from a 4, which is an A, to a 5. So not only are you getting A's, but now you're getting like a 5.0 in order to get into college. So everything's escalated. So everyone's expectations is I'm going to get A's, I'm going to get 5.0s, and then when you get to college, at least the transition for me was not the case. Right. The first time I ever received, I think it was a D or a C in any of my classes ever was college. And it was pretty shocking because the 6 years prior, all A's all the time.
Well,
above
that's the
A,
American
right?
system. In France, they don't really massage you in getting good grades. Like if, the bar is, I mean, at least in the school I went to, the bar was pretty high. So I didn't necessarily, the grades go from 0 to 20.
0 to 20.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So if I was getting like a 14, I was pretty happy. If you get an 18 over 20, like that's really good.
Now,
but that doesn't happen often.
See, the equivalent would be like here, everyone who's trying to go to college, you always get 18 to 20s. And then you get like 30 because you're taking these extra courses, additional courses that are at a higher level.
Yeah, if you get like a 6 over 20, that's like no good.
So like... Those are the two things, right? We expect to be educated a certain way, and we expect to achieve success based on the directions we've been given. And architecture school, for the most part, is not that way, especially first year. So I think that a teacher asking a student to do an assignment without giving any direction at all serves a couple purposes. The one that you mentioned, which is maybe a way for the teacher to kind of gauge the skill sets of what everyone has, if they don't already know that. And then the second is that's just what it is. That's what you do, right? It's probably to make the students get comfortable with not knowing how to achieve something and then figuring it out.
It's trying to make the student comfortable being very uncomfortable.
Sure.
And I mean, like I remember when I started architecture school, I was never one of those kids who were like gifted with drawings, who could just look at something and like draw it and it looks incredible. Mm-hmm. Like I didn't have a good hand. So every time there's an assignment like that, I would freak out. I'd be like, oh no, another one of those is gotta be super painful to like make look pretty and be decent and whatever. And the thing I think is just accepting that you're not gonna be to the level of the ones that are gifted, let's say with drawings, and it might take you a little bit longer to learn, but you could find your own way to draw, and it doesn't mean that it has to be the same way as this guy or as the teacher. And architecture has also a lot of more like technical drawings, and maybe that's one thing to look into, right? Instead of being more of a, like a fancy pencil sketch, like very romantic and whatever, like you could just be much more disciplined about how you draw.
As a way to...
As a way to feel more comfortable.
Oh, I see. Interesting.
I mean, I don't know.
Is that is it you cheating? Are you cheating by doing that?
No, you're not cheating. You're trying to find the way that makes you comfortable.
I think this also highlights the issue that architecture, there's two sides to it. There's the technical and the creative, if you want to make that kind of distinction, which I think you can. And the concern that a lot of students have during first year as you were describing, like you didn't have a good hand, right, is more of the technical, right? I mean, you see that first year too. It's the same with me. Like there are kids in first year who I'm like, okay, were you born an artist? Did you take like 5 years of art school? Like what the heck? We're asked to draw something much like this. I don't think we had to draw the facade of a building, but draw a building. And this guy's fucking like Picasso, but more legible, or he like this is unfair, and he's cruising by first year, right? He always gets A's, and you put up the stuff, and all the students are asked like, okay, everyone like choose the one that you think is best, and he always is selected because he just has a wizard hand. That's the technical aspect of it. What's interesting to me is that it doesn't really matter, and having taught first year and other years, it doesn't really matter what your skill set is in first year, to be totally honest.
No, yeah.
That is not going to dictate whether or not you're a good architect in the long term, for sure. It's also not going to dictate whether or not you're a successful student by the time you get to third or fourth year, for sure. You'll see that over the years of 1 to 5, a lot of times, I wouldn't say a lot of times, but fairly often, the students who are the most gifted in first year are not the best students at the end. Right. And so,
because they just don't try as hard.
That's part of it. And that's not to say that if you have a good skill set, it's a detriment. Of course not. It's an advantage. But the success of the architecture student is more about being persistent and not giving up and working really hard and getting adequate sleep and being healthy to a certain degree. If you do those things, you'll be a successful student, right? There are some students, I hate to say it, but it's true, being a designer is not in them. You could still be an architect and be successful in other aspects of architecture, but being a designer, it's just not your thing. Assuming that's not the case for whoever's listening, if you stay with it and you're persistent and you do the things I was saying, you will be successful. That's it. And the skill set you will require, because you'll have to. You'll be spending so many hours producing things by hand in the computer, using the programs, that you'll become close to an expert at these things just because of the sheer amount of time and effort you're putting in.
I think time, practice, and willingness of doing things. Like I think if you go in with the wrong mindset of being like, oh, I'm gonna fail, like not have confidence in yourself, not like giving up before you start, like that's not gonna take you very far. Like you just have to be persistent. You have to be not easy with yourself. I mean, easy and hard with yourself. Like you have to like not maybe put too much expectation on like your success, but also put a lot of work in, and maybe that would pay off.
There's also this component of being too concerned with what everyone else is thinking of you, right?
Yes.
Because if you were drawing stuff on your own, it was just you and your teacher, and that was the only two people in the world, you wouldn't be concerned if you failed. Be like, yeah, this is what I did my best. You'd be like, well, you failed. Well, that's my best, so I'm going to do it again to my best. You become concerned because your peers are doing better than you. That's all it is.
And that's the thing. Like you're in school, you're there to learn. Like you shouldn't succeed at the first try of an assignment or of something, because if you did, well, that means you probably don't try that hard if it was that easy to get to,
Yeah.
But that kind of like being judged by your peers or whatever in studio and whatever. I think I mentioned that story before in another recording. When I went to art school, we had a lot of like live drawing classes. And as a person who wasn't skilled with drawing, like if it was buildings or bodies, like I was the same. It wasn't that simple, It didn't look like something someone would want to buy. You know what I mean? Like, so, but actually, no, the bodies are sometimes a little bit easier because you can get it more abstracted in the way you can represent it, and maybe a building.
So you're drawing like potato people?
No, actually, no. But like I remember,
do.
we would explore different techniques, right? We would use like charcoal, or we would use what's called like Chinese ink, like the black ink, with like big brushes, and we would try different techniques, and some of them actually are very much you feel like I felt much more comfortable in just going more freely with it. Maybe because the tip of the brush was bigger, and therefore I was less worried about representing the details. And when I was using a teeny tiny pencil, I felt like I had to draw every little detail to make it accurate. So I think that's also part of like the students' exploration, is finding the tools that you feel comfortable with. But anyway, so, we would go to these classes that would be like a 2-hour live drawing class with a model and like 15 students and their easel and like big pieces of paper. And I would just freak out because I would be like, how am I going to fill that blank piece of paper?
Blank white space in front of you, yeah.
And then, you have to look at a naked person and you're like barely out of being a teenager. So it's very awkward. And then you see your peers having fun and, going at it and doing cool stuff. And it's... Sometimes you get stuck, like you're completely blocked because you're thinking people are looking at what you're doing and they know that you're not doing something really good and whatever. So that teacher actually he did I think a 2-day workshop with us, and he made us wear a clown nose.
Really?
Yeah. So it was like a 2-day workshop. We would each wear a clown nose, and the goal was to what he called the little judge in us.
Okay.
Like that little person in us that tells us like what we're doing is not good, or what are you thinking, or that's not the right thing, or you're not talented, or you can do it. Try to make that little judge like just shut up. So we would each wear the clown nose, and he would like ask us to do things and participate as a group, and we would have the goal was to feel completely uninhibited, like just very free. So like, we would like make sound, or like we would do like silly things. And the goal was really just to like forget about what people might think and just do it the way you think you feel it makes sense. And it was a great experience because first it created a bond within the group, as a bond of trust, and we all went through that experience together. So therefore it was a little bit stronger. But also just showing us that it's okay. It's okay to do things that don't make sense. It's okay to try, and and we're all the same. We're all human.
I think the class dynamic is it's a very prevalent part of what it means to be a student and what it means to be a teacher. And I think there's a tendency sometimes, especially in architecture school, because it can be competitive, for it to be more of a toxic environment, an environment of fear, rather than as an environment of group learning, right? And it's up to the teacher to kind of facilitate the group learning atmosphere and the clown nose atmosphere rather than the opposite. But unfortunately, in my experience, that doesn't happen very often, because a lot of architecture teachers are not very good teachers, in my opinion. They're more like architects who couldn't hack it as architects, and so they're teaching, and they think that being an architecture teacher is just to be an architecture critic, which is to have students do work, and you look at the work and you give them your critique, and that's the extent of your job as a teacher, which is absolutely not the case. That's a bit of a tangent.
No, but I think it's super important, like the whole class dynamic, because I could see how starting in, being in the 3rd week of the first year of architecture school and being asked to draw the facade of a building, and maybe feeling like, you just moved out of your parents' house, you're living by yourself, you're in a new school about things you don't know, you're surrounded by people who are not your friends, they're just strangers that are also starting, and now you're asked to do these incredible things that you don't know where to start. It's frightening. It's frightening. And if you could at least, like you said, like maybe make the class, the group feel like everybody's comfortable, then maybe that would be more encouraging into like, I don't know, go draw that building.
And that's up to the teacher to do. It's also up to the students. I mean, the students more and more, I think, feel empowered and self-empowered to make things how they want it. So you can make a group dynamic to be the way that we've been describing just on your own. You don't need to wait for the teacher to help facilitate that. I think also the point you brought up about college and university being a totally new experience is a very valid and good one. it's the same transition as you said when you go from being a little kid and being at home all the time with just your parents, and then you're at first year or kindergarten with all these strangers. It's like a shock to the system, and then you move from in the States, you move from that to a high school, a different place, and now you have periods and you have different types of courses, multiple a day. That's like a real shock to the system too, because you're like 14 years old now. There's these 18-year-olds that have like mustaches, walking around. It doesn't make any sense. The same abruptness or the same shock occurs when you go to college. It's a completely new environment. But my advice would be to embrace that and to say, well, if this is entirely new, it's entirely uncomfortable, then fuck it. Let me just try a bunch of stuff, and who cares if I'm going to fail? Also, it's sort of like when you're traveling in a way. Yeah. There's, I'm sure everyone can identify with this. When you go to travel to a new place, or not even a new place, but just a different place, and you're more or less on your own or with a small group of friends or family, there's this kind of feeling of you can reinvent yourself during the vacation, during the travel. It's like, I could wear these clothes and be this new alternate person. And there's a certain freedom that comes with this new place that you're in. You're right. If you embrace it a certain way, I think the same thing.
That's why you dress weird when we travel.
I think the same thing can happen when you go to any new environment, including a university. The other thing, and this might be somewhat sad sounding, or it could be very freeing, the chances of you staying in really close contact with all of your fellow first-year classmates 15 years down the line when everyone's practicing or going off to do different things is very, very, very low. So, like, I don't care about what they think, right? If they're being judgmental of your lack of skills, which you have not had the opportunity to learn yet, then fuck them. They're assholes, right? But I do think that there's some people have a tendency to underestimate how many good people are that there are within an architecture school setting. Mostly the people aren't assholes. There'll be a few, but don't let the bad apples ruin all the fun. And between first year and earlier I was describing the difference between first year and fifth year. If we think of the difference between first year and then, I don't know, let's say 10 years after graduation when everyone's practicing, the number of people who are going to be practicing architects, like actually design architects and working that function, not just a project manager who's just dealing with calendars and stuff like that, and then they're practicing architects, it's like 1 out of every 15 or 20 or something, maybe not 20, 1 out of 15. So if you're a first year student, like, really don't be concerned with the failure, because in the long term, it's all the people around you're worried about, they're not going to be around. They're going to quit and go do something else.
No, and I mean, and again, like, as you mentioned, there is different things you're learning in school and different things you need to know or do to be an architect or to do architecture in one or many very specific ways, right? Yeah. So even if these people are judging what you're doing in this drawing class and they're doing good and you're not, it doesn't mean that they're going to be doing good at every single other class and you're not. It's okay to do better in some classes than others. You cannot be 100% at everything. That's okay.
Absolutely.
And that's okay.
And you'll know by the time you get to, I would say, like fourth-ish year is when you start to see across all of the classes and within yourself kind of naturally where you gravitate toward in the spectrum of all the different ways an architect can practice. And then by the time you graduate and you practice for like 5 years, it'll be very, very clear, like, yeah, this person, like, stop trying to be, a project manager. You're not organized enough. Don't do that. Like, go be a designer or whatever mixture it might be.
And like some of the classes too, like maybe you're gonna fail, or maybe you're gonna fail one assignment and not the classes, and it's part of the learning experience, I failed a few assignments and I kept failing some of the classes either because I wasn't interested, I wouldn't get it, the teacher wasn't good at teaching the thing. Like, there is several
blaming
reasons.
The teacher. Mm-hmm.
No, but it's true. Like, sometimes it just doesn't, the stars don't align, it doesn't work out.
Yeah. One of the things you brought up was the sketching that you were doing as part of that art class. And of course, this person was talking about drawing a facade. Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned, kind of interestingly, that you could do a more technical approach as to kind of be successful. I would say that when it comes to these drawing exercises, if it's an open-ended assignment, like just draw however you want to do it, then I would try a lot of different ways of drawing. And it's almost like your goal, in a weird way, should be to fail. In the sense that if you're failing, it means you're trying to do something that you're not sure you can do it. And that's the only way you're ever going to advance in anything in life anyways. And so if you find a methodology that is successful why? Oh, because the teacher praises it, because the students praise it. It's praise, basically. That's how you measure success when you're a student. Praise from your peers and the faculty. If you find that method that works, I encourage you to abandon it as soon as you find out that it works, right? To use it, but don't repeat it, right? You should try. So if you do a technical type drawing and it works out, the next time don't do that. Do something different. Do something you know you're going to suck at, but you're going to try. And that's very, very important. There's a freedom that comes with that mentality too, right? It's not about being successful all the time. It's about failing 90% of the time, 9 out of 10 times, and that one last time you're successful, you're like, I figured it out.
Well,
I'm
yeah,
good.
I mean, you're still need to graduate, so you shouldn't be failing every single exam or assignment.
No. I'm not talking about in terms of like midterms and things for other classes. I'm talking about, these small assignments within the design studio. And that's the mentality you should have. There is this, and I like how you started this whole conversation with talking back to high school. Like, why do we have this concern that we have to be successful every time we go to embark on every single assignment? And in first year, you don't really do big projects and you do like mini assignments every 2 weeks. Why does it have to be successful every 2 weeks? Because that's what you're supposed to be doing in high school. Because if you don't do that, you don't get to college. If you don't get to college, you're not going to be successful. That's not how you produce design. That's the wrong mentality.
I actually remember my first studio in the first year was, maybe it was because we had a pretty eclectic and good group of people, but it felt like we were all in the same basket. We got catapulted into architecture school from a bunch of different places. We each probably didn't know anything about it, and we were all there to try and understand it a bit better and
That's the best.
and discover and uncover things. And so even if you don't have to be best friends with your classmates, I think just trying to create that energy that we're all there for the same thing. And, it's like, oh, what is this person going to come up with? Like, get excited about even like other people's stuff and don't take it as like, is it going to be better than mine or less good? No, it's about how we all thinking and seeing architecture.
I agree with that. And I say that as somebody who did not have that mentality mostly throughout school. Which is one of the things, if I could go back in time and do things differently, I probably would have had a slightly, there's several things I'd do differently, but I would have a little bit more of an open-minded approach or be more open and less competitive in the negative sense.
Oh, I was like that the first year, but then it got really competitive.
And okay. Okay.
But that's because that's kind of like...
That's who you are.
Again, I feel like that's how French schools were at my time. Some other people seem to disagree with that, and I'm glad if it has changed. But
it depends on the school that you're at.
Depends on it depends on the school. It depends on the group of people. There is one guy who's super competitive, and the 12 others aren't. Then it'll be okay. If everybody in the group is freaking competitive, then it's gonna be competitive. So. I
think your peers are your resource. There's this saying that all teachers and everyone says that you learn more from your what is it? You learn as much from your fellow classmates as you do your teacher. It's totally true. But that learning is not just about observation from a distance when you're sitting and stewing and being upset because they did better than you. The learning happens from engaging and being like, hey, that's like a really cool sketch. Like, how did you do that? And very likely they won't be able to explain how they did it because they're first years, but whatever, you're cultivating that kind of experience or
like
the potential for
you
it.
get that assignment, like talk with 4 other people in the class and be like, hey guys, like we have no guidelines, like how do you think we should approach this?
At the very least, what that's going to do is they're all going to say, I have no fucking idea. Like, this guy just told us to do something he didn't tell us. What the heck? And it's gonna be a bonding kind of experience. I mean, that's one of the best ways to make close friends is to exist in kind of a shared foxhole.
But I think to that assignment too, like trying different techniques could reveal something that works for you. Like, I mentioned like using a pencil or a felt tip versus using a brush with ink. Like, well, maybe look at that building and do 15 different sketches of it with 15 different techniques, and maybe something's going to come out. maybe it's just a matter of you just keep looking at it to understand like the structure. And, you know, it's not like you're going to grab a piece of paper or pen and the first sketch is going to be it, you know. And that's also like where failure comes. Yeah, you're probably going to fail at the first sketch. But if you do 15, the 15th is going to be 15 times better than the first one.
Yeah, that's probably one of the most important takeaways from this entire recording is that architecture and design, really any creative endeavor, is an iterative process, right? And iterative is a word that a lot of first years, they don't know what that word is. Iterative means you do, I shouldn't try to explain words. You do iterations, you do multiple versions, multiple attempts at something. It's iterative, right? It's exactly as you said. If you're tasked with turning in a deliverable, this one thing, you don't just do that one thing, you turn it in, you do it 15 times.
Yeah.
And it's not to say you might not do 15 full-fledged paintings and then submit one. That might be a bit extreme, but you'll do 15 quick ones or 10 quick ones and 3 final ones, and then choose the best of the final 3. That is design, right? And that is a lesson unto itself and something that takes getting used to, because embedded within that process, exactly as you said, is failure. Even though it's not failure in front of other people, it's still failure. And there's this thing within us sometimes where we want to have perfection in the process.
Yeah.
Before we were talking about being successful in the assignment itself, even beyond that, within the process, we want to be successful, right? When I sketch something, I want the sketch to be good. If it's not good, I get upset, right? No, you should do the sketch knowing it's not going to be good, right? And attempting to make it good, but knowing it's not going to work out.
Well, it's kind of like you can't be lazy in getting to success. Like, it takes work to get there. Like, if you're going to run a 10K run, well, the first time you're going to try, you're going to fail. After like half an hour, you're going to crash, right? Mm-hmm. And the next one, you're going to get better shoes. And the next one, you're going to get hydrated. And the next one, you're going to get like a little, banana in your pocket. and at the 15th one, you're going to be close to the 10K. It's, unless you're born a superhero in whatever field you are, like it's not going to be that straightforward.
And even in design, even if you have that superhero skill set, a good hand, right?
Yeah.
It's not about that. And it's not, that's not going to get you anywhere in terms of design. That alone will not get you anywhere.
And actually, I think also, in that assignment of go draw the facade of a big building, maybe the teacher is even more interested to see how you're going to figure out how to draw it than the actual drawing itself. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I feel as a student, especially when you're starting and you don't really know like what teachers are expecting, like you're just focusing on the thing that is assigned. But
True.
A lot of time that's not only it, that's not the only thing that the teacher will be looking at.
Agreed.
If you show them like 3 notebooks worth of sketches of like, I don't know, like you did a plan and you walked around and you did like a whole exploration of how do you get to that? Like the teacher might be more interested in that than actually seeing the facade of the building. Not to say that you don't have to complete the assignment with what's required for it, but I think you should probably always think that there is more to the assignment than what's being assigned.
We had a teacher in school, and a lot of the students pretty far into the quarter, because it was a quarter system, were feeling lost and frustrated. And I have to say, I wasn't feeling that way, so I didn't quite understand why people were so flustered, but they were, and they started to become a little bit, you could feel they were becoming a little bit upset with the teacher. They were sort of blaming the teacher. Not they weren't outspoken, but you could feel it in the studio. And so the teacher one day comes in, he's like, okay, everyone, like, let's have a seat, let's pull up the big TV. And everyone's like, what are we doing here? We don't have a lecture plan today. It's just a studio. Like I usually do desk scripts. And this was 4th year, by the way. So we're sitting kind of, what are we going to watch? And he plays a scene from The Karate Kid where, have you seen The Karate Kid?
Yeah.
You must have. Daniel-san is complaining to Mr. Miyagi. He's like, Mr. Miyagi, would you have me doing these stupid chores, man? Like, I thought I was going to learn karate, and I'm not, you teach me how to wash a car and like wax the car and paint the fence. Like, what the heck? It's the iconic scene where the Mr. Miyagi says, Daniel-san, he goes, paint the fence. And he goes to kick him, and then Daniel-san paints the fence and blocks it. And he learns that, oh my gosh, you've been teaching me like karate this entire time. I always thought my immediate thought when that occurred in the classroom, like, fuck off. Like, this is, architecture school is not that way. It shouldn't be that way. But so it's a terrible example, actually. But whatever, it's fun. But it is true that most of the assignments and even and all of the real projects you'll do as a real architect practicing, it's not about the brief that's given to you. It's not about the project description that's given to you. You'll be told in class, this is the assignment. You'll be told in class, this is the project, design a school. You'll be told in real life, this is a school, design a school. The objective is to never design a school based on what they tell you it needs to have or what it needs to be. Your objective is to think outside of that and to find a new way to approach a school to make it better than it was before, or in some kind of way. That is a difficult lesson to learn. I think it's good for
you have
lower
to be
division.
critical about the assignment.
Yeah, but I think underclassmen, the first and second years should maybe be aware of that, but don't overthink it. There's a danger that some people try to get like too creative and like, okay, they asked me to like draw the building. I'm going to draw like a floor plan instead. Like, no, he meant like draw the building. Please just draw the building. So like, it's difficult. Like, don't go too far out there, because then you just get into territory where you're circumventing the problem.
But I'm trying to look back into my archived file in my head, which is kind of a mess in there. I'm thinking that I think during our architecture school, there's probably a few assignments where I focused too much in completing the assignment the way it was assigned. Mm-hmm. And either I didn't do more than what the assignment was asking for, or I didn't have fun. And therefore, it wasn't that interesting of a deliverable. You know what I mean? And I think, being critical or aware that there might be more to the assignment, but also think about it as like, it's not a math equation that the teacher is asking you to answer to, which everyone will have the same answer. The answer needs to be yours somehow. And it's much more about, not about you as a person, but it's much more about what you as this specific individual can bring to the table. It's much more introspective in some ways, and
I agree with that.
And therefore, it should be much more enjoyable than just responding to the assignment the same way you would respond to an assignment in high school.
There's this issue that all first students have, most of them, where they are wanting the approval from the teacher. Yeah. They want to know how to do it. And again, I've taught the first year, so I've seen it. And I'm guaranteed, like the first assignment I give to a student if they're first year, guaranteed is an in-class assignment. Okay, everyone in class, like today and the next 2 days, we're going to do this thing. Okay, here's some rough guidelines. Have a crack at it. And I'll be like, okay, I'm going to walk around the studio and kind of talk to you guys. If everyone needs help, raise your hand. And otherwise, I'm just going to kind of make the rounds on a snake and go through and talk to each student. And inevitably, you get to the sixth student out of like 15. You say, okay, everyone, let's pause for a moment. Let's gather and say, okay, I've talked to about half of you now. Let me explain why this architecture school and design studio is different from what you've done before in high school. And it's all the same stuff that we've just said. This is not a system where it's a math problem. We all have the same answer. And it's not a paint by the numbers. I'm going to tell you step by step by step. You do this, you pick up the pen, you draw this way, then you move that way, and now you have a drawing. Now you're done. Now you've learned how to do a drawing. That's not what we're doing here. And if it's a model, that's not what we're doing either with the model. It's about you finding your way and working through that being lost. And then I'm going to help you as kind of like a coach, but I'm trying to think the difference. It's sort of like I guess a coach would be a word. It's a coach and cheerleader and some other thing, and a psychologist kind of all rolled in there, but I'm not actually going to do it along with you. It's not a cooking tutorial, right?
No, and I think part of it's because it requires critical thinking. And
Yeah.
I actually don't know if critical thinking is really something that you learn in high school. I mean, I'm looking back and I'm thinking, well, maybe like my philosophy classes was maybe where I would explore critical thinking. But was there anything in high school that asked about your opinion or like problem solving? Yeah, sure, math equations are sometimes like problem solving, but something that requires you to be critical about something and arguing.
Mm-hmm. It's a difficult thing because
know.
to be critical requires you to understand yourself. And a lot of students, when you're first year, you're too young. You don't understand yourself. You're trying to survive this new territory, this new land with all these people, who are now you're surrounded by. I remember when I was a freshman, there were like these 25-year-olds who were like old. It's like you should have graduated. And there were like 27-year-olds because they were transfer students, and they were like walking around with giant beer bellies, like beards. I'm like, this is
A couple kids.
I don't belong here. I could be your son or something, So, but anyway, I think the critical thinking aspect is important, and it's a tough thing to learn. It's not going to be easy. It just won't be. I think we were talking about the iterative process, and I've said the story on here before, but I'll say it in this recording because it's relevant. One of the biggest learning moments I had when I was in undergrad was actually an English course that I took. It's because I didn't take the AP, Advanced Placement. That's what it's called in high school, those classes. I didn't take AP English, and I should have, because I took normal English in high school, and it was like a catastrophe. It was like a scene from whatever high school movie. I mean, it wasn't in class. It was a joke. But anyway, so I took English in college, right? And I know there was a freshman or something, so I expected I'm going to get an A, because I've always gotten A's. That's who I am. I'm an A student. I turned in the first paper. I got like a D-. I was like, oh shit. Kind of devastating in a way. And the rule in the class...
I've been learning the wrong English my whole life.
I know. Like, actually, you're writing in Chinese. This is English. The teacher had this rule of you could rewrite every single assignment as many times as you wanted to, and she'll regrade it every time you resubmit. And that new grade you get replaces the previous. Like, some teachers will do this thing where you can rewrite it and then you'll get an extra amount of points, but it's capped because you already submitted something at a D-. In her case, it was like, no, if you submit a D- paper and you submit to me a paper that's worthy of an A, you get an A. That's the rule.
I'm sure the administration of that school was really annoyed with her because she would just keep resubmitting her
grades.
No,
it's all internal until you get to midterms or whatever. And although that's a good point, I don't know how that works in the end. Sort of like fees, percentage of construction. How do you deal with the difference? And it was, I'd never had a class like that before. I was kind of shocked. Through 12 years of learning, I'm like, I've never been given that opportunity ever. No one's ever said that to me.
That's pretty great.
And it was a complete mind shift. Now, obviously, in real life, you have deadlines and you don't have a chance to redo it. But like, she made it very clear in the day when she's like, no, my job is to educate you and to teach you, for you to learn as much as possible. And from a teaching perspective and methodology, it's genius, because you are grading students accurately. The grades are not inflated. All grades are inflated these days. It's bananas. Like in architecture school, in order for you to get a B- or a C, if you get a C in studio, it means you're not showing up, which in my book means you should be getting an F. And so it gave her the opportunity to grade give an actual grade, and then an opportunity to prove it. And so I wrote the papers like, I don't know how many times. I think I got like a B or something in that class.
No, and it's great because it's a great way to encourage a student who wants to try harder to get to a better level as much as they're willing to,
And it was a lesson that the first time I understood for writing, and the same thing applies to when you're creating something else. In this case, it's a model or a drawing or whatever form of architecture, that you don't write it once and you submit it. You write it once and you do it again and you rewrite it as 15 times, and then finally maybe you get somewhere that's decent. And it's a mentality shift, I think.
Yeah, I think also, like the message said, I'm afraid I'm not, not being worthy.
Oh.
And I think you have to remember you're starting at zero,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a weird thing. Like, you graduate from high school, you've done like, I don't know how many years of junior high and high school, right? You graduate, you are like at that level, and then you start architecture school and you're back to zero. So it's kind of a drop, right? You feel like you just start where you left off and then keep going. So like in the confidence level, the self-esteem, and like, what you think versus what you don't know, like that doesn't make sense. It's Like I think emotionally it's weird, and then like the whole shift of starting college, which is a big chapter in life.
It's a different approach to education, and it's a different what happens is when everyone's trying to get grades and that's their focus, right? You have all of your peers around you, and everyone knows that there's this scale of FDCBA, and it's this ladder, right? And everyone knows roughly what everyone else gets, and you can kind of, you don't judge your friends based on it necessarily, but you rank everyone based on that scale because it's a shared scale. It's like everyone's grades are kind of like plastered on this conceptual, this imaginary wall, and you know where everyone is. Okay, that's a C student, that's a B student, that's an A student, that's a D student. You know exactly that's a 5.0 student, and that's the vision of the education environment. But when you get to a design studio setting, a creative setting, all of that goes out the window. The other experience I had where I started to feel kind of maybe what you experienced with the art classes of being just in this mixture of people, and you're learning together and you're testing stuff, and it's more of like a research environment lab, and you're cultivating things, and they're live and they're fresh, and they might be good, they might not be good. Has someone done this in the past? It doesn't matter. It's new to us. And that feeling was when I studied abroad in France, and we were students from all over the world, a handful from the US, but we had people from Russia, from Hong Kong, from Italy, from France, obviously, and other places. And we'd all be in the studio at night working on these assignments. And it was just, there was a kind of sensation of freedom that I had not had really before. And there was no obligations or real concerns about ego, because I'm not going to see these people again. Although I ended up staying in touch with some of them, but I'm not going to see them again. And we're not competitors. We're not in the same main school. This is like a short, program in a certain way. So let's just try and see and learn from each other. And I think that mentality somehow needs to be present to be successful. That mentality needs to be present across the entire studio, if you can help cultivate that as a student. And ideally that, but at the very least, it has to be present within yourself when you're working at your desk. And every line you draw is not going to be good. It's not going to be the case.
I think the only way you really fail in architecture school is if you don't do the work.
If you don't do the work.
If you don't show up, if you don't do the work, then you're failing. And you're failing school, but you're also mostly just failing yourself, honestly.
You brought up a good point of when you're given an assignment, like, do you just try to complete the assignment? Do you try and complete it in the way you think what the teacher's looking for? Which goes back to what I was saying earlier of like, the success for the student in the student's mind is like, oh, is this what you're looking for? If it is, then I've checked the box, then I'm going to get an A, right? Like, what is that what we're doing here? And so a lot of first years and even second years sometimes, it's just, I can sense as a teacher that they're playing this game of like, okay, I'm testing. They're like, okay, what do you think of that? Is that good? Yeah, good, bad, no, okay, no, maybe, wait, why? If I rotate it, are you good with that? And I'm like, hey man, like, it's a weird thing. I'm like, stop asking for my approval. I'm not going to give you my approval because I have very high standards, and it's not about that. Like, stop. You want my approval because I'm going to give you a good grade, but I've always graded, and a lot of teachers do, based on effort, right? If you put in the time sincerely for yourself, not for me as a teacher, but for yourself as a student, I'm going to give you an A because the grades are inflated also. But that's like what it is.
That's why I'm not a teacher. I would not give an A.
I know. But so there's the way you view the assignment, as like you were describing, right? There's the fulfilling the assignment, and you're filling it up, completing it to the mark that the teacher's looking for, and that's where you're going to hit. That is not the objective. That's not the objective. So I really like the idea of doing an assignment multiple times on your own. Because why not?
It sounds crazy. I mean, you have other classes, you have other assignments. Can you do that for all the assignments? Probably not. But I think honestly, like, I wish I had thought about that when I was in school, because I think I would not have given the first draft as my assignment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like I probably have done that too many times, honestly.
Well, you know that now because you've been practicing. You were trained as an architect and practiced as an architect, but first or second year students, it's a difficult thing to learn. And I will say also that this is exactly the same as when you're an architect and you're working with clients.
What also,
if a client,
but also it's hard when you're a student to know what's good and bad when you're producing stuff.
well, the solution to that, if you don't know, is to produce it a bunch of times and then talk to the teacher and be like, what do you think of these?
Yeah.
Right? And you ask because you're wanting a critique of the work so that you can do it better for yourself and do it in maybe a different way or do it in a critical way, not because you're waiting for them to say, yep, it's good. Then you can, I'm good. I can sleep well. You're not going to sleep well ever. You have to, as you said, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You have to, part of being an architect, a large part of it is being able to have a good night's sleep, knowing that you've not figured out the answer and knowing that even if you complete the thing because there's a deadline, there's still something about it. You feel like there's some aspects of it I think I could have done differently, and being okay with that.
And even once you graduate and start practicing, even after a building is built, you still look at it and be like, I could have done this differently. This could have changed. Like there is not a finite answer to the assignment. Really.
It's the same like the math problem, right? The answer is 6. The teacher says the answer is 6. I did it. I'm done. I got a 6. That's 1 point for me. Ooh. Being an architect, all of us, we're in a continual state of process and nothing's ever truly completed, which is a weird thing to say. And I mean that in a more kind of conceptual sense to a degree, but it is true. And there's a little bit of being accepting that and kind of embracing that. And there's a freedom that comes with that, I think, if you can learn to do it. What I was saying before is students looking for the approval from the teacher is the same thing that can happen with the architect and the client, right?
Yeah.
And that is how you produce shitty architecture, is if you are an architect and you are just looking for the approval from the client. And what happens is when you turn in or you give a presentation of this house or this building or whatever it is, you say, client, what do you think? And they say, I think we should do this. And you say, okay, so if we do that, are you happy? Yeah, I'd be happy then. And I also think that if we change that, then I'd be happy. Okay, then if you're happy with that, then that's what we're going to do. No, that's not your role as the architect, right? So
that's not design either.
That's not design either. So the other reason to learn how to not just seek approval from others is that's a necessary mentality to have if you're going to produce quality architecture.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of architects who don't do that, and it's like that's why we have a bunch of bad buildings.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it goes back to being honest with yourself. If you're not built to be a designer, you could still work in the field of architecture, just not as a designer. Maybe these people would be great at, I don't know, project managing or technical skills or construction oversight. I don't know. But yeah. The
other life lesson I'll say on here with this failure and feeling like you're feeling down and you're not worthy, etc. And we're kind of preaching like just work hard, stay with it. You want to be careful not to burn out. Architecture, both in the duration of a project in a school that lasts more than a couple of weeks, of a project and the duration of entire school and duration of a lifetime of a career, it's a marathon. And there can be phases where you burn a lot of fuel and then you have to rest a little bit, but you don't want to do that too much because you will burn out. You'll hit a point where you will crash, and everyone has a limit. Like physiologically you have a limit, and you don't, as much as I think people should be ultra dedicated to their passion and their craft, you do need to at some level be mindful of where that line is.
Well, then you have to find your like your oasis, right? You have to find things outside of architecture, in life in general, that just kind of like refuel, revitalize your thoughts, and because your creation is as good as your brain juice is, right? So if your brain juice is at 0, your creation is at 0. No, you know what I mean?
Technical terms.
You gotta. you got to keep the life going on in your head, and the imagination, and the desires, and the excitement, right? If all of those levels are out, are down, like what's left for the creative process to be running on, you know?
I agree. And
that's from school all the way through until you retire as an architect, you know. That's, you can't, the life balance is always sounding like, yeah, you know, I have to sleep, I have to eat, I have to do this and that. But like, it's not just physically, it's emotionally, it's the level of happiness, it's the self-esteem, is, you know, like disconnecting things for a while, reconnecting with it. Like,
and it's difficult. I want to say also that this is just a recording, right? We're talking in a room, the two of us, whoever's listening, I don't know who you are. I don't know what your patterns of behavior are. I mean to say that some people who are listening to this, they need to be told, you need to dial down a little bit, or be a little more organized. And some people who are listening to this, they know
opposite.
you need to put in more time. And so it's to say that I just don't want someone who is not putting in the time to cure this last bit and say, like, okay, I probably need to dial back. There's someone listening to this who heard this last part, and no, you need to do the opposite. You need to put more time in at your desk. And as a general trend, I don't know, I just think students are getting lazier. I'm like, put in the hours. So stop complaining. It's a lot of work. Yes, I get it. Yes, you want to see your friends, but I don't care. Put in the time. Put in the time.
Well, and there is also something, you know, like I'm like re-looking at that message that we got. Sometimes I feel like, and particularly in the latest generation, that a lot of students are not complaining or questioning the work or the assignment that the teachers are giving, but kind of like being critical about it, and like, why are they giving us this, and how are we supposed to do that, and kind of like rejecting what's being given to them. And that's fine. I mean, you know, like it means somehow you have an opinion about maybe what should be it. But I think also you should remember that these people have gone through school. Hopefully they're good teachers. Hopefully they know what they're doing, and maybe just trust what they're giving you instead of rejecting you. Again, it's about being in the right spirit, in the right mindset to do things. And if you start by rejecting what's given, I don't think that's, you know, that's positive.
The perspective I always had, and I think it's a helpful one, is that when you come across in this space and in this conversation an assignment that you don't agree with, just take it as a challenge.
Yeah.
Just be like, I think this is stupid, but it's a challenge. I'm going to meet your challenge. I'm going to show you how good I am. That's the competitive side of me. And that's how I'm going to approach this. As opposed to just fully reject and be like, this is dumb, I'm not going to do it. Like, you should never have that attitude. And even if you have a teacher, you think they're just, a lot of students like, you're old, you don't understand anything about Rhino. What are you talking about? You're from a different century, la, 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 la. So what? Play the game on their terms, win the game, show them that you're really good. Because I can guarantee you, if you have the skill set and the ability to be successful in all of the studios, which is not going to happen, but in all the studios, that is all skill and knowledge that's going to be ultra valuable later on. So don't reject it. Just
no. And you know, it's like the same thing as maybe 20 years from now, when a client's going to come to you with a silly request on a project. Yeah. You can reject it, but guess what? That person is hiring you to do the work. So either you comply with what they want, but you internally disagree, which probably is not what you should be doing, or you're trying to play within the rules and teaching them and showing them better, or you know, like you said, that you should take on the challenge. You shouldn't just be agreeing with the things that you think are good, or you think is what you want, or you think that's what should be done. Like, you should try and play within those rules.
Yeah, and this is a tough conversation because a lot of what we're saying, if you took it as a soundbite, would sound like a complete contradiction to the things we were saying earlier, right? Which is being critical and thinking for yourself, and et cetera, et cetera.
You can still be critical.
So like, how would you explain that contradiction, you know, for people who are listening? They're like, well, you were just saying a moment ago to do what I think is right in a way, but now you're saying to do what the teacher is saying, even though I don't think it. Do you understand? Yeah,
well, you can't reject it. You have to, maybe you should do it in the way that you think makes sense in order to reject it.
I see.
You know what I mean? Like you can't say you don't like broccoli before you tasted broccoli.
Mm-hmm.
That's silly. No, you have to eat the broccoli and then you have to explain why you don't like the broccoli. Well, because it's bitter, because there is like big chunks that are really hard to eat, because it takes forever to cook, because it makes me gassy. You know, like you kind of like, no, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, if you want to win the argument, you have to have an argument, and you cannot win the argument if you don't.
That's an interesting perspective on it. I was never thinking of it as a kind of like, I'm going to prove you as to why this is stupid. I was thinking more of like that. I think one of the ways to understand school is more like a time to just acquire all of these skills and these kind of like power packs and these upgrades to yourself. And as much as you can acquire, the better, right? I want a red one, I want a blue one, I want a green one, I want a whatever this. I want all these different ones. The more I can gather, the better. And in some ways, that's the point of school, of architecture school. I think that sometimes when achieving success is the primary focus, we forget that other perspective of I'm just here trying to acquire stuff. You know what I mean? And I think also school is about learning about yourself and learning what things you're drawn to, your kind of path, so to speak. It's true. But at the same time, some of that thinking of finding your own path can lead to a perspective that's the opposite of I'm trying to gather as much as possible, right? Because if you're carving your own path, it kind of means you want to exclude certain stuff. And that also means sometimes I don't believe in this teacher and what they're saying. Fuck them. I'm not going to like do any work for this. This is bullshit, right? That is part of the mentality of like I'm finding my own way. But that's not the mentality of I'm just trying to build up my strength and acquire all these different power packs. And I think that gathering of information is maybe the most important aspect and mentality to have in undergrad. You have plenty of time later on to figure out what path you want and what skills you're not going to use or not use. And so that's what I would say. There also comes with that mentality of gathering and collecting and consuming a freedom, right? Just because I'm embracing and I'm going full force into this class that's going to be we're only going to do white models for whatever fucking bullshit reason. We're only going to do big white models. Even though I think that's dumb, I'm still going to do it with full commitment because there's going to be something I'm going to learn. And I'm not going to be doing white models for the rest of my life, but there's some kind of skill set I'm going to use later on.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean because you're doing the assignment that you're necessarily agreeing with it. And it doesn't mean because you've done it the way it was asked, let's say in this instance, that you are letting go your critical thinking about it.
I had a real tough time with despite all I said, I had a real tough time with this in school because I had teachers and I was like, this is so stupid, man. Like you're asking us to design a giant facility and you've broken up the design, and this is like fourth year. Hope they're not listening. You've broken up the assignment into these bits and pieces, and on the first day, you want us to design a fraction of a facade as a process to design this massive building. I mean, that's stupid. Like, no, I don't want to do that. Also, I'm a fourth year. I've been as courses. I've done a lot of projects. Enough projects. Like, I have an interest in this aspect because of the program of what this thing is. I want to start there. No, gotta design like this like sliver of a facade that you're going to repeat. Stop forcing your process on me. Let me do my thing. So it's tough.
I told you, I mean, with a couple of friends a few times, we went up to the teachers because usually studios were taught with at least 2 teachers. And sometimes we would ask to modify the assignment.
No, so like why? Like how?
Oh, yeah. Like we had this project, I think we were in 3rd year or something. And there was like this massive site in Paris. And we were each student was supposed to design a building. And it was like a huge lot between building that was kind of like abandoned and whatever. And the 3 of us came up to the teacher and were like, well, actually, we don't think it makes sense for each of us to design one building on this lot. It's a big lot. Like what we want to do is propose a master plan where the 3 of us come up with a master plan and then we each design a building on this plan. We think that would be much more interesting. And she was like, okay. I mean, you guys
what year was
figured out a plan. I think it was 3rd year.
Okay.
And and it worked out. The teacher was like, sure, that sounds good.
Yeah. to make things even more confusing, there's this thing of initiative that students don't understand, and that is one of the pieces of advice I'm always giving to students is like, if you want to do something and you're not seeing a clear-cut path to it, either just go do it on your own outside of the school, or talk to somebody at the school and be like, I want to do it, and then see what they say. And generally, architecture schools are fairly receptive to that, because they're like, yeah, good for you. Let's see what you can accomplish.
Yeah,
so this is like combination of embracing the lesson that will be learned at this moment, even though it's not totally in line with your ethos, but at the same time being a rebel, you know. Like,
well,
it's
and if
weird...
you have a strong feeling about something, like in that case, like the three of us were strongly against the idea of doing the assignment the way it was presented, and instead of just being like rejecting the assignment, well, no, let's reject it, but instead let's propose something, you know, that's kind of the assignment, just the way that we think makes more sense. And if you have a strong opinion and a strong, you strongly believe into something, like you said, most likely the person on the other side would be receptive, because when you can feel that someone is very motivated about doing something a certain way, they're most likely not going to discourage that, because it might grant great results. You know, it's showing them that you want to grow. You kind of maybe have found a way that you can grow in this assignment, and nobody would want to stop you from growing.
I think it's a very smart thing.
It was a crazy idea, though. We actually had to do a lot more work than
I'm sure
any other students in the grade. The giant model, and then like we each got like way too far into the buildings, and it was like urban design and architecture. We're like, what the fuck are we doing that? It's not an urban design studio. No one else is doing this. And then we're like, okay, we got the master plan, but we're gonna do a park between the buildings. So we had to come up with a concept for the park, and it was this insane.
Do you still have it?
Thing.
It sounds like an interesting project.
I still have pictures, and I remember we put a lot of late nights into it because we had no idea how to approach these beasts. Where do you start? You start with the building, the master plan, and then the park, and how do they all relate? And and then, okay, we have a common plan. Okay, how do we present each of our buildings? I need your drawing to be put on my background, and like the whole workflow,
coordination. I hate that part. It's such a mess.
And
that's a fourth job right there.
And because we came up with that rule, we could ask the teacher how to figure it out.
Like, so listen, I made a mistake.
And like our peers in the studio would be done a week before, and we're still crumbing and designing the night up.
Good for you guys. Good for you guys. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you need to have. But what I like about that is a number of things. One is that you realize you had an issue. You felt there's a different way that you want to approach it, right? And then you talk to the teacher. It's a simple, dumb thing, but not enough students talk to their teachers.
Yeah.
If you have a question about something, the smallest thing, just ask your teacher. There's email, there's text, there's Slack, there's all this. Just ask your teacher. Be like, hey, I have no idea where to start. Or be like, hey, I don't know what pen to use. Just anything, right? And they might not give you the answer you want if depending on your question, depending on if they're a good or bad teacher. But it doesn't matter. Just create that line of communication.
Sometimes it's hard too when you're a student, because I remember those particular teachers of that studio were very fun and like very easy to approach, very approachable people. But I also had a studio teacher that was this very successful guy who had like a big office in Paris, and a pretty attractive dude, and older and kind of like not severe looking, but like not intense. Someone I would have come up to and be like, hey, you know what? We want to change your assignment. Like, I probably would not have felt comfortable talking to him.
Yeah.
But retrospectively, I'm like, that person is here for you. So you should feel like you could go up to them and ask, and, they would appreciate that. I don't think they would judge you for it. That's the reason why they're there. They're there for you.
I agree. I would say that the vast majority of teachers would respond positively to a student asking any question, assuming the question, again, comes from a sincere place of wanting to learn and do better, and not to test and see like what they need to do to get a passing grade. It's pretty obvious when
but sometimes it's hard. Sometimes you're lost. You don't really know
what to ask. But just start the conversation.
Or what to do,
And
with the assignment.
if the teacher is not helpful or they're rejecting things or whatever, then they're a fucking dick.
Yeah.
And that tells you something about them. If I want to say also that if you're stuck on an assignment because you just don't know what to do, you have a blank canvas in front of you, you don't know where to start. I think one of the mistakes that design students do is they try to do too many things at once in one assignment. Mm-hmm. And they also try to achieve a level of perfection. And it's also difficult when you see 15 other students and they're all doing it differently and like, oh, that student's drawing it that way and he's like very successful. I can't do that. Yeah, that person's doing that. Oh, I can't do that way either. I can't do that way either. Or I want to do all of them. It's either this thing where you can't do anything that everyone else is doing or you have to do everything that everyone else is doing. It doesn't function that way. So one way to get around that is you actually just pick, you can't do this all the time, but you pick a method or style of drawing. If it's a simple drawing exercise, just do it that way and see how it feels, especially if you're a first year. Just try it out. Because again, it's not about you having your own voice on every assignment perfectly. It's about acquiring skill sets. And over the course of 1,000 drawings, you will figure out what maybe is more expressive of your ideas, right? But it's going to take 1,000 drawings to get there. So during that time, use it to try different things. And there's a certain level of freedom, again, that comes with that approach.
Yeah. The second message we got.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah. The second message we got says, "Hi, I want to be an architect, but I'm kind of scared because everyone says it's hard and I can't tolerate it. But I still want to try. So is it hard and stressful as people say? And what do you recommend me to do?" Well, let's face it. It's not easy. I don't know if it's hard per se, but it's not easy.
You kidding me? It's hard.
Well, it depends what your level is.
Well, let's assume. But let's assume that they're talking about the practicing as an architect, not being an architecture student, right? That's a fair assumption.
And what do architects do? They design and get buildings to be built. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, if you think about doctors, what do doctors do? They heal people, fix them up so they can live their lives.
Yeah.
They each don't sound easy, right?
Correct.
So I think it's a fair assumption to say that it is hard.
Okay. I didn't know where you're going with that analogy, but fine. Yes, it is hard. I think something we have to address is that embedded within the question is there's sort of an assumption too that this person hasn't done architecture school. Because if you've been through architecture school, then you know it's hard. Yeah. And you're kind of at a certain crossroad. This person's before that. So
I mean, any job is going to be hard to one way or the other, right? Even if you're a stay-at-home mom, it's not going to be an easy job. So if you're looking for something that's easy, I don't know. I don't even know what that job would be.
No, but there are much easier things to do than architecture, right? To be a successful mid-level successful architect is a lot harder than being a mid-level successful manager at I don't know. It's at some other generic corporation place, So maybe we can talk about why architecture is hard, right? Architecture is difficult because, and I was thinking about this the other day, architecture is difficult because it really is just filled with contradictions. It is technical. It is also very creative and artistic. Those are like opposite things in some ways, right? Mm-hmm. It's highly functional, but also it's not about function at all. It's about beauty. It's a service. You're meant to be providing a service for somebody. You have a client who pays you to do things, to give them a building, right? But at the same time, you're the expert and you're telling them what to do and you're providing them specific guidance and you're the one who's creating the thing. You're not an artist. You don't do your artwork and someone just buys your art, right? You're providing a service to create something functional. So the service and the art aspect, those are also opposites. It's meant to help better society and things like that, but architecture is super expensive. Those are oftentimes contradictory things. So architecture is difficult because you're trying to achieve this thing that almost is a pinhole-sized target that's between these opposing forces. That is, I think, in the broadest sense, why architecture is difficult, right? You are designing the thing. You don't build the thing. Other people have to build the thing.
well, like I said the other day, like you're designing things for someone else and it's going to be built by someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, what are the chances this is all going to work out? You know?
Yeah.
And by the way, it's going to take probably a few years before that happens.
Yeah. Architects also don't make a lot of money, but it takes an incredible amount of time to design a piece of architecture and do CDs and do CA and all that stuff. Opposites.
People want architecture, but they don't really understand it.
Architecture is one of the most important aspects of human society, but most humans don't understand its value of what architecture is compared to buildings.
People hire you because they think they hire you for your expertise, but most of the time they tell you what you should be doing.
It's all, and also just more in terms of buildings. You know, we exist. Humans exist in contradiction to Mother Nature to a certain degree. And so we have to create these structures to protect ourselves, keep weather out, keep us nice and cool and warm, and etc., which is not what the natural environment wants at all, right? Water infiltration, I'm just super specific. Water infiltration is like the bane of our existence as architects and builders. That's like a huge thing. Water does not want to be kept outside. It does not. And we do all this effort to keep it outside and fucking still gets in sometimes.
I mean, yes, architecture is hard, but I think we talked about that in another recording too. Like, if something is hard, then does it mean that you should reject it before you try it? I mean, if you're already discouraged by knowing that it's hard, then yes, maybe it's not for you. Like, you're maybe not cut to run a 10K marathon, like if your legs are only 10 centimeters long, maybe that's not for you.
10 centimeters long? What?
No, you know what I mean? Like,
you're talking about the gingerbread man?
Like I cannot tell you if you should do it or not. Only you can make that decision. Like, I can't. Yes, it's hard, but like, I did it and I'm doing it, even if it's hard. It doesn't mean that you should do it.
The other thing with this part of the conversation is that, again, architects don't make a lot of money. And if you're going to go to school to be an architect, that costs a lot of money generally. So you're going to be in a deficit and debt, likely, unless you have wealthy parents.
But that's like for a lot of other professions too. That's something you have to be aware of.
Yeah, there is for other professions, but a lot of other professions, you end up making more money than you do as an architect, and you don't put as much time as an architect. So
just go to Europe then.
This gets into another, just go to a different country.
I mean, honestly, if that's something,
somewhere else. But that, I don't really want to get into it too deeply with this because I don't know if that's what the question's about necessarily, but that is a factor. So, I just don't want to be responsible for someone being told like, you should try things you're interested in, and then 10 years later, like, well, I get making no money, I can't feed my kids, why the fuck did I do this? And you told me to give it a try. So that's the one thing to be aware of. Unfortunately, architects generally do not make a lot of money, and student loans are expensive. I don't know if the government's going to forgive them in the United States and all that stuff, but that's a big thing.
Well, that's in the States at least. We don't know when this listener is.
That's true.
The other question was, so is it hard? Yes. Is it stressful?
Yes.
Yes. Is it hard and stressful every day? No.
That's a lie. That's a lie.
There are some days that are more stressful than others. There are some that are more fun than others. Like, I mean, you're a nurse at a hospital. Yeah. Is it hard? Well, yeah, it's physically, emotionally hard. Is it stressful? Well, yeah, because you're always running around to like make sure people are doing okay, right? Like, does it feel that, do I think about, is it hard and stressful every day I'm practicing architecture?
But maybe it's more useful to talk about why it's hard and stressful rather than comparing it to being a nurse, Like,
well, it's stressful because you have deadlines, because there is money involved. You have to make sure that if you design things, you design it well, that you resolve the details. So when construction starts, like, there is no issues. You have to make sure that there is no mistakes on your drawings, so there could be repercussion. There is a schedule. There is a lot of people involved to get a project done, and you're most likely the point person or the one responsible for making it all work out. So it is stressful, yeah.
All the things you mentioned are true, but the larger takeaway, I think, from that is that there's just a lot of different aspects to being an architect. Now, in an office, you'll have different types of architects. I mean, they're all architects, but they each focus on different things, like you were saying earlier. You have some people who are the technical folks, and they know all about building systems and details and how to keep water out of buildings. You have the people who are good at designing. These are generalizations. You have people who are good at project management. You have good people getting clients rather. You have good people for whatever other category, right? But classically, if we talk about an architect, they're doing all those things, and that's why it's hard, because you're kind of tasked with being good at a lot of different roles that are oftentimes not found in one human being, right? So to be an architect, in reality, if you're at an office, can mean very, very different things depending on your position in the office, as the 5 roles I described. But to be an architect, generally speaking, you have to be good at all 5. That's why it's difficult. Even if forget the whole getting business and getting clients thing, because that's more of a business owner problem. You still have the management, the organization, the details, the design, the skill set of drawing, they're working with subcontractors to go into the site, all this stuff. It's a lot of different skills. That's why it's challenging to do.
But if you're an employee of, like, I don't know, an 80 people's office, I could probably say it's much less stressful or difficult than if you're a one-man show running a practice.
Of course, but that's mostly to do with.
So, if you're not planning to have your own business and be an employee, work at a big office, yeah, it's going to be a little stressful.
It's still, okay, another way to approach this is, why is being an architect, even in an office setting, where you're just a generic architect, you're not pigeonholed to one thing, but you kind of do a little bit of everything. Why is that difficult and stressful compared to other jobs? It's because architecture itself it requires one to think about things from multiple perspectives. That is one of the things that distinguishes architects, I think, from maybe other types of professionals, is you're having to think in different ways all the time, but also in different scales. You're thinking about small details, and then really, really large master plannings of sites, right? And even outside of the property, you're thinking about all the stuff outside of the property, right? So that what you do on the property, on the site, makes sense for everything else around it. And this zooming in and out is something that's sort of, it's not entirely unique, but it's more unique to architects, I would say. So it is challenging to do for those reasons. I think the life of an architect is stressful and is hard, primarily because of the amount of hours it takes and the low amount of money you make. So you come home late, you're tired, you go to sleep for not many hours, and you wake up and you do it again. And with the amount of risk that comes with buildings, you're not just putting in a lot of time and hours with low pay for low stakes. It's high stakes. And the reward is not a financial one. It's not like a tech company or a startup where you're doing a lot of hours and low pay and a lot at stake with the investors. But if you make it, then you're going to make a bunch of money or this and that. The reward is not financial. The reward is more humanistic. It's social. It's a creative one. So that I think is why it's difficult. And all of that together on repeat means it's about endurance, and it's about being positive and optimistic. That's why it's challenging.
Which you're not.
I am at my core, but I don't like working with shitty people. They annoy me. It's like, do your job better, and my life wouldn't be so difficult. That's the other aspect.
That's the other aspect is working with people.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. The architect, you don't exist on your own, right? I was sort of comparing us to artists. Generally, like an artist, let's say you're a painter. It's you and your paint, man. That's what you do. You make a painting, and it's hard to sell, but if you sell it, you become successful. That is the method you do. It's you, yourself, your studio, your paintbrushes, your paint, and your canvas, and that's it. To achieve architecture requires you to talk to like 100 different people from 100 different places. And what are the chances out of 100 random professionals that how many are going to be really good at their job at the level that you might be at? I don't know, maybe 10, 20 out of 100. It takes years and years and years before you find the good ones. Or if you work at a good office, that's the case. But so yeah, that is, it's the coordination aspect is difficult too. So I think that being an architect often feels like everything is working against you, and you're trying to achieve this high quality, beautiful thing that you know is important for yourself, for the client, and for everyone else in the city, but no one really believes it as sincerely and as thoroughly as you do. It's not a belief for you, it's a fact, and it is a fact. But everything is working against you trying to get there. And it takes you being ultra dedicated consistently to get to that point. And then when it's done, people are like, oh, I get it. This is why. And then you say, yeah, this is why.
So this is great. So you just discourage everyone from being an architect. Thank you, David.
No, we need architects. We need to do it.
But the other thing is that, the field and the profession is changing. Things are evolving. So, like the architect's not making much money and all of that stuff, like it's slowly changing. And there is more and more of younger offices who are aware of that and are against that and, trying to help the profession. So it is challenging. It is hard and it is stressful, and it would probably remain hard and stressful for many reasons, because a lot of things are out of the control of the architect. Mm-hmm. And that's just the nature of it. That's just what it is, right? But other things, could be changed or could be different.
And not all architects have to practice or have the mentality that is as intense as I have, for example. Like you can be just a good, average good architect, do nice little buildings for people and be content and still improve cities and spaces and society, and that's what you do. But even at that level, you're going to have some challenges. So I don't know if that answers the question. It's a complex question, actually, to answer to someone who doesn't know architecture at all.
Well, and if people are telling you that it's hard and you can't tolerate it, well, they need to expand on that. Like they should tell you why it's hard and why you can't tolerate it, And
I've said before on here also that there's a lot of architects who are just bitter. They're bitter and they don't do anything about it. And it's like, stop complaining, go do something about it, or stop complaining. Those are your choices. And unfortunately, a lot of people, when they're faced with that decision, they don't perceive it as a decision. They just stay in their mode of being negative, blaming everyone else, not doing anything to try and fix it. I concede that everything, you're constantly battling uphill, and that's the nature. But so do something about it. Try and change the game. Try and fix things. Try and cultivate good people to work with. Find better clients. Do whatever you need to do to change the situation for yourself. But a lot of architects, especially the older ones, they haven't done that, and they're not going to change their mentality. So I would say to the younger generation, if you're being told by X group of people just this negative kind of, it's hard, it's challenging, la 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 la, you kind of have to think about, okay, they're saying that, and we're saying on here that that's true, but who is the person saying it, right?
Talk to different architects. Talk to an old one. Talk to a younger guy. Talk to people from other countries. Just talk to different architects because what they're going to have to say is very much about what their path was like.
Sure.
But it doesn't mean it will be what your path will be like. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. I think you have to kind of like do your homework, do your research, and make your own mind about it.
Cool. Is that it?
Yes.
Well, then, thanks for listening to this recording, everybody. If you like what we're doing, then support us by leaving a review in the Apple Podcast app. We could always use more reviews. That's a great way to help support the show and promote the show, and et cetera, et cetera. You can also subscribe. I think you can rate us on Spotify. And of course, you can subscribe and like and comment, et cetera, on YouTube. And we're on there for these kinds of informative episodes some of the times, and the guest recordings. And where else can they find us?
The website, secondstudiopod.com. All of the episodes are there. There's some transcript, there's some video clips, there's even some guest work so you can see what they do. We have the hotline, 213-222-6950. You can call and leave a voicemail or send a text message. That's usually how we get those questions in. And that's it. That's it. We have a lot of things in the works, so stay tuned. And,
we have a lot of good guests recorded.
Yeah, and as usual, if you have any feedbacks or anything you want to add to what we said in response to these two messages, please feel free to send it to us so we can share.
Or other questions or topics you think we should cover, then DM or email us. That works as well.
Okay? Alrighty.
Bye.
Bye-bye.